Okay. Well, it's about 1:09. I'm not sure if I don't see any attendees in this room itself. So I'll give it until 1:10. And then maybe I can start presenting from there. Okay, well, it's 1:10. I guess there's nobody in the room right now, so I assume that this part of the talk isn't going to be recorded. So for anyone who's watching this, I hope that whatever is published takes place right after what I'm saying right now. Hopefully it's the right thing to do for me to start talking and record it so that whoever wasn't able to come today can see the recording. So yeah, I'm going to wait 5 seconds and then I'll start in on my actual presentation. Okay. Okay. Hi. Well, thank you for joining me today. And thank you for inviting me to your conference. My name is Dr. Steve Engels. I'm one of the faculty members in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Toronto. And my talk today is going to be about the journey that I end up going through to becoming a game design researcher. So I know some people are attending this conference interested in gaming, and there's a lot of people who learn about gaming through the people who are actually working in the industry. I've taken a slightly different path. And this is part of what I want to talk to you about. While there's lots of stories about how people have gone into making their own games, the idea of researching games is something that's mostly unexplored. Most people don't know that this is even a thing. So this is why I want to talk about this and help you see a little bit of what I do and kind of how I got to be here. All right, so let's start off by talking a little bit about myself. So I am part of the teaching faculty at the University of Toronto, which in the teaching faculty means that when you come to University of Toronto, then you'll end up taking courses and being taught by professors. So I'm one of the professors who's in charge of delivering a lot of the course content. This is not what my courses look like or what my classrooms look like. This is a promotional photo. Typically for our courses, they range from either large first-year courses to smaller boutique fourth-year courses. So among the different courses that I teach some of our introductory programming courses. These are the larger ones where we have maybe hundreds of people per room and then several sections for everyone who wants to learn a little bit about programming. Once you get past that course into our second year, I teach some of our computer hardware courses. These are the ones where people in computer science learn about how the computer actually works and how to build it from electricity up to these larger microprocessors. Once you get past that and get into third year, there's a couple of courses that I've taught in the past. One is a software engineering course. This is where you learn about how to design software, the way architects design buildings. And then I also teach an artificial intelligence course. This is, again, for those who are not hearing about AI everywhere, it's just about creating software that can do sort of human cognitive tasks. But then once you get past that into your fourth year, that's where I teach our video game design course. And so that's kind of the reason why I'm here, right? Is that I started off being a video game design instructor, but after a few years of doing this, I ended up branching out. So instead of just teaching about how to make video games, I also engage in research. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with what research actually means, think of it as like R&D. What we do is that university is filled with people who are experts on particular fields. And so what we do is not only do we teach our students what it's like to be in these fields, we also help to push the envelope of what the technology is able to do. And so my areas of expertise are in things like artificial intelligence, because that's what I did my grad degree in, and in video game design. And so what I'm working on is trying to find new things that video game can do and how to design these things in ways that people haven't thought of before. So I mean, that's kind of where I am right now. But the question is, how did I get here, right? And that's what this talk is about, right? Is saying that this is what I do is one thing, and I enjoy what I do, and it's very cool. But for anyone who's kind of looking at this and trying to figure out how does one get to be this kind of video game design researcher, that's basically what the story is about. So I'm going to break it down into three component parts. First off, how did I end up getting here? Like, what kind of decisions did I make in the past in order to get me to this point? What kind of stuff is going on now? Like, what kind of work do I end up engaging in? And what kind of stuff do I see going on in the future, both mine and yours? All right. So first things first, let's look in the past. All right. So my origin story. So a long time ago, if we go really far back, this was me. And yes, I was very cute back then. So what you're seeing here is me in like the late 70s, early 80s. Back then, video games as we see it now didn't really exist. The only kind of gaming that we would get access to, at that stage, not that I was old enough to play them, was mostly in things like board games, right? The idea of creating video games was still something relatively foreign and futuristic. The closest that you were able to get, as I was getting older, like 4 and 5 and 6, is we would start finding things that were more like mechanical games. So whereas board games would allow you to kind of play out some scenario, if you were looking at something a little more arcade-like, you could get things like, these little home pinball machines that you could play at home. As time developed and electronics became a little bit more prevalent, you would find really small and simple games that were on like dedicated pieces of hardware. So this one was kind of a U-boat game where you had like 3 buttons that you could launch to try to hit some boat with some torpedoes. That was the extent of what video games were like at the day. A little bit further on, as I started getting into elementary school, they started developing these things called the Game & Watch. Now, anyone who's played Smash Brothers knows that this is one of the characters in there, but you may not know where this came from. Back in the day, the only way that you'd be able to have these kinds of video games is to have really simplistic games with a very small number of buttons that you would use. So this is one example of something called Manhole. The only job, like the main objective of this is to prevent the people who are walking across along the top and the bottom from falling into the holes by basically going to one of 4 locations. This was called the Game & Watch because essentially what they were using these for was like, oh, it's like a digital watch that happens to have a game on it, right? And that was kind of the extent to which these games were able to play. All right, so not particularly advanced. Time went on and I ended up getting a little bit older. So this is me in like grade 1 or grade 2. When I was at this stage in life, video gaming was accessible only through the good graces of my older cousins, because as older cousins, they always had access to the cooler things. And so I would go over to their place and I'd get my first encounter with things like the Atari, right? This system that would hook up to your TV and allow you to play games through a TV screen. That was always in competition with things like the ColecoVision, right? And both of them, again, were like the first home video game systems. And it's through these kinds of systems that you'd play games like Donkey Kong and like Elevator Action, Milk and Nuts, and Spy Hunter. And so the reason why I'm showing you these things is because you probably heard of Donkey Kong before, right? These things show up in popular culture. But for every game that you've heard of, there are dozens, if not hundreds of games that happened at the time that no one except for those who are alive at the moment would ever recognize, right? Like I doubt that anyone has heard of Elevator Action, and certainly not Milk and Nuts. Spy Hunter, even that one was relatively well known at the time. But even so, people had trouble recognizing it. And so like as time went on, I started to play more and more games. And the reason why I'm telling you about this is because some of this influenced how I end up becoming the person I am today. But we're not quite there yet. So as I got older, like 11 or 12, that's when home computers were starting to become a thing. And the one that you see in the top left right now, this one was this portable PC. Like basically the keyboard would flip up into the screen and then lock in place. And then that's how you would carry this thing around. The screen was no bigger than what my hand would be like today. And it had these 2 5¼ inch floppy drives. And this was considered to be revolutionary because, wow, instead of having a computer that you had to keep in your office, you could bring this thing home. This was starting to be when we'd have things like the Nintendo Entertainment System. This is not a real NES. This was one of the ones that I think it was like the knockoff that we got from overseas. You did what you could, right? And then as time went on, our computing systems got upgraded from this tiny little portable PC with a monochrome screen to the 286 with, I think, 4 colors and something like 640 kilobytes of RAM. And this doesn't seem like much, but it was enough to play the games of the day, right? We'd have games like Load Runner, where like you basically go around digging holes to the enemies to fall into while you gather all the crates. Things like Moon Patrol, where you just have to jump over the obstacles that you see in your way and make sure that you don't land on one of the rocks or fall into one of the pits. Arkanoid. Some of you probably recognize this as being like Brick Breaker. But yeah, this was at the time, their equivalent of it. Before Brick Breaker became a thing, Arkanoid was the one, like the standard that you'd find in the arcades. And well, on the PC that I was playing at the time, Space War. Now, you may not recognize any of the other ones, but Space War is one that, if you haven't seen it before or haven't heard of it, you really should take note of it, because Space War was one of the original video games, and it was never meant to be played on a computer. This game was actually designed on an oscilloscope. And this is a tool that's used in order to measure like electrical signals. And why on earth would you design it on this? Well, because at the time, this was the only technical hardware available. So anytime people created technology, someone was there to design a game for it. And this is I mean, as you can imagine, this thing was not a particularly complex game. This game was the type that, basically just go around and, shoot little spaceships, either with like lasers or little missiles. But it was the ground that other games would build upon. So things like Star Tron, where you could actually play as multiple different ships with the same purpose in mind. Things like King's Quest. This was like the original RPG where you would walk around on this sort of two-dimensional level and you would interact with the world by typing commands like, pick up rock or climb tree. These were all the rage. They had King's Quest, Space Quest, Police Quest, Heroes Quest. All these games where it's just like the text-based adventure game with a little bit of graphical interface. Then we used to make games off of IP even back then. So there was things like Home Alone, the game, where you had to go around this house and lay traps for the robbers who were coming in. But my favorite were the things like California games, or the summer games or winter games. Back when the Olympics was kind of a bigger deal, they would make games that tied into those. And the reason why they would do that is because doing something like a full football game like Madden, there's no computational power for that. But small games, small little sports like discus throw or javelin, that's doable, right? That's something simple that you can put together and doesn't require very much memory. So a lot of these kinds of titles were coming out at the time. We can play various Olympic games, either summer or winter, or in this case, California games. This is where, some of the game titles started to, they had a little bit of trouble coming up with new things. They didn't want to wait for like 4 years in order for something to come out. I'm sorry, I don't know why my videos aren't playing right now, but anyway, I'll see if I can link some of these things in later. But these things should be playing like a video of this right now. Okay, well, the other major source of video games for me at the time was Chuck E. Cheese. Now, while it was great to be able to play things on our home computers or go over to my cousin to play their consoles, the main place that you go in order to be able to experience arcade games was Chuck E. Cheese. Yes, they had animatronic characters and other like non-video games like skee ball and ball pits, but they were also the place where you'd find things that you would never find anywhere else. Games like Burger Time, where your main job was to be the chef in the middle and walk over the parts of these burgers until all of them came down into the little trays at the bottom. Not particularly sanitary, but people were making games off of everything at the time. Oh, and you also had to fend off these anthropomorphic hot dogs and fried eggs that were trying to kill you. What else do we have? Q*bert, Q*bert was one of those games, again, just deceptively simple. You just have this big grid and you had to just make sure to hop Q*bert onto all different squares in order to pass the level. Donkey Kong Jr. Donkey Kong was such a big success that it spawned off various things, and Donkey Kong Jr. actually kind of worked as far as these games go. And the main idea is that you're supposed to be freeing Donkey Kong from the evil clutches of Mario. More on Mario later. And speaking of which, we play things like the original Mario Brothers. And this is where, being old like me kind of comes in handy, because if anyone knows a little bit about Mario history, like there's a lot that Mario has done over the years. And some people, have had the good fortune of being able to play the most recent offering of like things like Mario Odyssey. Some people could go back in history to play some of the original 3D games like Super Mario 64. And if you really go far back, most people will think that the original Mario game was this. But this was actually Super Mario 2. The original one, if this video will play, oh, it's not going to play the media. That's unfortunate. Well, the original one was actually this. This one here was the original, where the main idea was you're playing as Mario and Luigi, and you're just trying to bump these creatures. You can't touch them, otherwise they kill you, but you can bump them from underneath to flip them over, and then you can kick them out of the way, right? And there's a whole other rich vein of history to talk about why Mario was designed the way he is, why he's a plumber, why there's pipes. It all starts on the idea of these 8-bit systems and the restrictions that they had on what kind of characters they can design. Anyway, you can read up on that, but being at the time, the players of these games, we just kind of accepted that, Mario was the way he was without all this knowledge about him being an Italian plumber. That stuff came later. Okay. I got older, right? This is about high school level. And games at high school levels, well, I mean, we still had the ones on the computer, but we were able to get out more, right? Because we were older. So we would start venturing into places that's were featuring, game cabinets. And at the time, almost every convenience store or, like casual, like fast food restaurant would have these video game cabinets in there to try to draw a larger crowd. So the one that we were always playing on, the Street Fighter 2, that was in the back of the local falafel hut. And in addition to that, I ended up getting a better computer, I think like a Pentium, which at the time was, like that was advanced technology. But nothing substituted for going to actual arcades, right? Was as a high school student, because you have more freedom and more autonomy, we could go to the local arcades. And there were these places that were not particularly clean, but they were filled with rows of these arcade cabinets, things that had more computational power than any console at home. And so this is where we play some of the more advanced things like Street Fighter 2, or like the fan favorite, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, where you had like the 4-person brawler and you just made your way through all the different characters in the series. Games like Goonies. Goonies, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but it's a movie from the 80s, like a Steven Spielberg movie. And they made this game that was a tie-in. And unlike most movie tie-in games, this one was actually awesome. And so you'd go to the arcades and you try to play this epic quest, get all the way and beat the game. And very obscure ones. Again, historically, most people are never going to know about some of these games. The ones that were in these arcades, only maybe like a small fraction of them are going to stand the test of time or actually have people remember them now. But we'd have games like Hammer and Harry. Oh, and I really wish I could show you the media for this one, because Hammer and Harry is such a weird game. Sorry, but this was working this morning when I tested it. Okay, so time went on. Game systems also, in addition to becoming these things that were really elaborate in the arcades, started to develop better handheld versions, like they were actually portable now. So we would have the ubiquitous Tetris, right? This was the new game at the time that the Game Boy came out, and it was packaged with the Game Boy. And so everyone then knew about Tetris. And this was the original, like black and white version of it. And these games, because again, now that the hardware is more portable, you lose a lot of the power that was on the consoles. It made these really, really simplistic games. So, the original Kirby was on this. You'd have games like, DuckTales, where you bounce around on the environment like Scrooge McDuck, and things like Mario. And this is where I think Nintendo started to realize, we need to get a handle on Mario, because we can't just slap Mario into anything. Because unlike all the other ones, this game was kind of put together with very few computing resources. And so it was kind of bad. Again, a video here to show, but we'll move on. So this was happening during the school year. I'd go down to the local falafel place to play Street Fighter 2. In the summers, we'd be at home. And that's where, because again, we had no internet at the time, most of the time what would happen is if you want to play a game, someone had to have like a bootleg copy of some game and then go over to someone's house and then upload it onto their hard drive, right? Using, again, these 5 1/4, or if you're really lucky, these 3.5-inch floppy disks. And so there would be these games like Bard's Tale 2 or Ultima. And again, with no internet, if you were having trouble or you're getting stuck, there's nowhere you could look up to try to find the solution. The only way that you could actually get through these things with some help is by talking to your friends and, making these hand-drawn maps that you'd photocopy and share with others. Now, okay, so I've been talking a lot about, the video games over the years, and I just want to take a moment to sort of stop and say, I was not like this video game fanatic. I wasn't like shut inside my house playing video games all the time, even though I might be making it seem that way. Most of what I wanted to try to do at this point is to kind of narrate the progression of video games over the years, but I don't want to make it seem like that's the only thing I ever did. I ended up doing more stuff like this, partly because, there's just more to life at the time. And while games were great, I was also trying to get involved with like a number of different sports. Like I was on 4 different teams at one point, just because I wanted to try different things, right? Games, of course, but other stuff too. I was really into music. This comes up a little bit later too. And so things like piano and guitar, clarinet and drums. And also I was a camp counselor, right? I had been going to camp for a number of years, and then I decided to become a camp counselor. And this is all these things are part of the story, right? Even though the story is mostly about video games, these things come in too. Anyway, high school ended and I went to university. I became an engineer, and I went to study at the University of Waterloo. I did computer engineering, and on the side, I did a cognitive science option. Cognitive science is all about the study of the brain. At the time I went to university, I really wanted to go into psychology, but parents were saying, no, we want you going into something where you can actually get a job. So computer sounds good, right? So they said, sure, computer engineering. But I mean, I found out that cognitive science was kind of the intersection between a bunch of different disciplines, like psychology for one, but also things like, like artificial intelligence and a little bit of engineering as well, and even philosophy. So I was a computer engineering student, but on the side was learning a little bit about how the brain performs cognitive operations, because I liked that stuff and I wanted to study it. Anyway, so finished that degree, with that option, and decided that I wasn't quite done with school. 4 years were great, but there were so many things that I hadn't explored yet, and I wanted to have a chance to stick around a little bit longer and just learn the things that I thought were really interesting, things I got a chance to do a little bit of in my undergrad degree, but I didn't feel satisfied. And so I stuck around for grad school. This was me in grad school. This was actually another promotional photo that was taken at the time. Yeah. So anyway, when I went to grad school, I did the extension of what I had been doing in undergrad, at least in the cognitive science aspect, only I switched over to computer science. If computer engineering is all about the hardware, computer science is all about the software, building the machine versus programming it. So I did computer science as my grad degree and specialized in artificial intelligence, right? The application of computer science onto these cognitive tasks. And even though I was incredibly busy, and this is probably like the slowest point in my life in terms of playing games, I still had a chance to play a few. At the time, it was things like Spyro the Dragon, Grand Theft Auto 3, things like Twisted Metal, and Atomic Bomberman. So these are all just very different areas, right? Spyro the Dragon was kind of, it's the 3D open world where you're trying to go around and collect things and have adventures. Grand Theft Auto, well, we all know where that started, right? But this was the original one, back when the main characters looked like these kinds of weird, blocky mannequins. Twisted Metal was about, driving around on a track while shooting rockets out of you. And Atomic Bomberman, well, this was just like a frantic bit of fun. Again, I wish the videos that I had were playing right now. But what would have happened is just you would lay these little bombs and you just try as much as you can to run out of the way before your own bomb explodes on you or other people's do. Yes, it's unfortunate this isn't showing what I wanted it to. All right. Okay. Anyway, so this was just kind of the slice of what happens from being young to getting to university. Every stage, there were new technologies, new games coming out. People were pushing the envelope to create these new experiences. But let's go to where we are now. After I finished grad school, I got a job at U of T. They were looking for people to teach because at the time, computer science was starting to explode, and they needed people to be able to teach these larger and larger classes. And so I started, I had disposable income, so I was able to afford things like PS2. And from there, like a whole new set of games were available. I was playing games like Sly Cooper, which is like a heist kind of game with these anthropomorphic animal creatures. Things like Indigo Prophecy, which were like these weird, like kind of trippy sort of narrative games. and games like amplitude and frequency. I'm not expecting anyone to know about these ones. These ones were the predecessors to other games like Guitar Hero or Rock Band. While everyone knows about those, no one knows about some of the rhythm games that came before, but it was essentially the same thing. You'd have these popular songs, and unlike the other ones where you'd have like guitars and drums being separate instruments, this one just had them like a racing track, and you'd switch from one track to the other, hitting buttons at the right times in order to unlock that track and have that part of the song start playing. Right. And so the whole idea behind this game was just trying to make sure that you could unlock all these tracks and keep the song going for as long as possible. Again, there's clips online for this. Anyway, so while I was there, I had been at U of T for a little bit. I've been teaching for a little while. And then after a few years, they give you this performance review where you're supposed to kind of find out what things you need to work on. And what they said was that it would be nice if you could come up with some more curriculum. Some courses, like other than just teaching some of what we already have. So I was like, okay, sure. What am I going to offer? What kind of course can I teach? And of course, the first one that comes to mind was video game design. And so I created a video game design course. And this thing started about 15 years ago, but at its current state, it's this really huge experience. Not only does it take students from our computer science program, but we actually have, over the years, combined our course with other courses to create a more full experience. So we actually work with OCAD University. This is a art and design college down the street from U of T. So their art students combine with our programming students in order to make a game together that combines the strengths of both campuses. And then, more recently, we've joined up with the Faculty of Music. So now we have these teams that are working together, artists, programmers, and musicians, all in the name of making video games together. We try to follow the standards that are used by the game design industry, like looking at the major milestones that they use in order to move a game from idea to final delivery. And because we're trying to model this stuff after industry, all the games that our students make were always shown to industry panels. We get people from the local game industry in Toronto to come to our classes and give feedback to our students like 5 times throughout the 12-week semester in order to take their game and just constantly try to make it better. And the result of this would be that at the very end, we would take all the games that were made in our course and we'd put them on public display. At first, these were small events, but as this became kind of more of a regular thing, not only did our schools, show our stuff to the general public, but soon every game design program in Ontario joined in, from like 18 different schools from Ottawa down to Niagara, joined into this huge event where basically everyone from the local game industry came in order to see what kind of stuff our students were capable of. So it was a big talent show that we call the Level Up Showcase. If you want to know more, you can go to levelupshowcase.com and you can see what kind of stuff we've been doing more recently. But this was something that like 2,000 people came through in the course of a few hours, like 90 teams from 18 different schools with dozens of people from the local game industry looking to try to harvest local talent. Anyway, so I made this 4th year course and it just grew to be this huge thing. I ended up offering other courses in 1st year and 2nd year to introduce people to video game design, and in 2nd year to take part in video game research. And so this gets back to where I was originally talking about, which is the idea of what research is. So in my 2nd year course, what we would do is we'd find some research topic, something about video games that we want to explore that's not currently known. We look at what kind of stuff people know about the area, and we try to see where there's gaps. And where there are gaps, what we do is we create these experiments that are supposed to help fill it in by seeing like, oh, what happens if we make games for, I don't know, like games for education, for instance. So this was great because I had been doing research as my grad degree, but now I could take my love of video games and combine it with kind of the research that I have been doing in other areas too. And this is not something that's unique to me. A lot of the people in our department engage in research of different kinds. So for instance, this is Ashton. He looks at the impact of computer science on like social issues. Like how does it impact people, the use of technology on a daily basis. This is Jeff Hinton. He is one of the original people who worked on machine learning, and he has won one of Canada's only Turing Awards, which is kind of like the Nobel Prize for computer science, for his work on neural networks. And he's considered to be like one of the greats, like the giants in the field. This is Raquel. Raquel is currently working on self-driving cars with Uber. This is Steve Cook. He is working on computer theory, things like the solvability of computer problems, why things like cryptography is unbreakable, or at least unbreakable in a reasonable amount of time. He's one of the people who pioneered the theory behind that. This is Jessica. Jessica Bergner-Kars is working on robotics, but not just like the regular ones that you would have seen in the science fiction movies, but things like continuous robotics. So things where instead of it just being like an arm joint, it's more like a tentacle, like an octopus arm instead. And this is Karan. Karan is someone who works on computer graphics, but not just creating animations, but making new tools so that animators can create new and innovative things. And with that, he actually created some technology that went into this short film that won an Academy Award. These are many people, like just some of the people from the many that are in my department. Our computer science department has something like 70 odd people, more depending on the people who are split across departments. And each one of them has an area of expertise that they work on and generate research in. So basically, whatever area of computer science you're interested in, there's somebody here who is creating it or working on novel technologies in that area. But this talk isn't about that. This talk is about me. And since I promised to talk about my research, let's talk a little bit about that. So quickly, the stuff that I've been working on. Because I know how to make games and I teach my students how to do it, we work on these things together. So we work on games for things like seniors. What's found was that some psychology researchers had seniors play these first-person shooter video games and noticed that this had a positive effect on their cognitive skills. They were able to remember things for longer. They were able to do these cognitive tasks better. And so what they wanted us to do was to help work on games that could do the same effects without all the violence and death. Similarly, we worked on games for children. How do you use games as a way of teaching people things like letters and numbers, like creating these interactive experiences for families who want to be able to have their kids learn something on mobile devices. We worked on games for the blind. How do you do video games if you don't have access to video, right? And so we were working on games that were mostly based on things like 3D sound and the haptic interfaces, so things like the gyroscopes and the vibrations on mobile devices. Games for change. Those are games that are supposed to create a positive social change in the player. So you can use them in order to create awareness of certain social issues or to teach people things in the case of things like, simulations or, having people live through the social issues of the day. And a lot of things like VR and AR games, that kind of stuff is still very new and, in the process of being explored. But that was one of the things that early on, we were just exploring to find out what kind of things could you do with it. We do a lot of collaborations where instead of just coming up with stuff that's within computer science, we try to use computers and video game design to help other people solve their problems. So we had people from psychology who wanted to learn more about video game violence. We would put together these games that would help illustrate what kind of effects violent video games would have on players. Spoiler alert is all the stuff that's going on in the US right now, blaming school shootings on video games is completely bogus, but we're the ones who are coming up with the research to help prove it. We work on games for the Toronto Rehab Institute. So U of T is really close to the hospital corridor. And so we get people who have these stroke rehabilitation therapies, but they're not very fun. And so in order to get people to practice, basically get people to do these therapies that help their speech or to help their motor skills, we help put it into a game so that it's more engaging and people don't realize that they're doing, stroke rehab. We've worked on things that involve games and AI and machine learning. So recommender systems for games, like Netflix says, after you played these games, maybe you like these ones. Things like automatic music generation. We would have these AI systems that could train off of existing music and create new music in that style in real time. So if you were a small studio like Toronto often has, and you can't afford a composer, you can use our software to create background music without having to pay a composer to do it. 3D terrain generation. If you wanted to create a level for a game and you don't want a level designer to have to spend a huge amount of time crafting this mountainous scene, we can create something that will train off of existing terrains and then generate new levels in that style. But they're novel every time you generate a new one. So it helps the level design process by streamlining it. And things that would help with the game AI, right? How do we create something where instead of having someone program the AI down to every single individual rule, we grow it, have these AIs figure out what play style works best, and basically just learn how to become better players. But the biggest area that I worked in was things like educational video game design, because what we found was that when it comes to a lot of games, every game involves a certain amount of learning. Every time you pick up a controller and have to learn what buttons control what, you're learning something. Every time you're trying to figure out how this boss behaves so that you can beat it, you're learning some sort of strategy. So it's not surprising that people try to use games in order to teach. But what we found was that while these games, like the educational games, they were either fun or they were educational, but not usually both. And anyone who tried to make a good educational game, let's say you managed to make it work, it was hard to take the lessons from that game and transfer them onto others. It was hard to figure out how to make another educational game that was successful based on the ones that did seem to work. So what we were trying to do is just say, look, it would be great if we could try to take these games and use them to teach things like the Ontario high school curriculum. It would be even better if we could not just make a successful game, but also figure out what makes them successful. So we created this area called Games for Learning. And in order to make this work, in order to research this was kind of the thrust of my PhD. What we actually did was to say, all right, well, how do we try to figure out what are the secrets behind making educational games both fun and good learning tools? So we made a lot of games, made like 25 games in total, each of them supposed to be teaching some area of science, technology, engineering, and math, otherwise known as STEM. All of these games together created this picture of what kind of design features helped make them better learning tools and which ones made them more engaging. Our undergrads got involved with this. Each one of these games was made by a team of undergrads and the topics that we made them on were all drawn from the local high schools. Basically what topics teachers found challenging to try to teach in a traditional setting. And then we tested these things on people who came for this science summer camp. Anyway, so this is basically what research is like. You have a hypothesis of something that you want to test. You create an experiment that helps you test it. And then you just gather the data and try to see what the data is leading to. No bias ahead of time of what we expect, just wanting to find out what kind of design features made these games more fun and made them more educational. So this is all part of the research I do, but this also led to a widespread involvement in other kinds of game design activities. The Royal Ontario Museum, we used to work with them on making games that would help make some of their exhibits more engaging. So things like, how do you try to make things like Elizabethan furniture into a game? We were involved in art activities like Nuit Blanche, which is when Toronto's becomes like a large outdoor art exhibit overnight from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. We were working on things that were kind of using game engines in order to make interesting interactive art exhibits that were going to be part on display. There's all these events like, the Google Geek Street, where they would create these outdoor fairs for at-risk youth. And we would have booths there that try to show them how you can use game design in order to make stuff of your own. Game jams, where our students would take part in events where you'd work on a game for a weekend and then you entered into a little contest and there's thousands of dollars of prizes to be won for the students who made really good games. And conferences. There are conferences on game design, like GDC, the biggest one that happens in San Francisco every year. And we get involved in those, present to those if we could. So anyway, this is kind of where I am now. This is This is the present day for me. In terms of the future, well, let me just say at least that when I started, I had no idea that this was going to be my future, or this is going to be my life, that I would end up getting a job that allowed me to be part of the university community. And as part of that job, I would end up becoming involved in video games, not just in playing them, but also in helping make them and research new kinds of video gaming. So now my life involves being able to teach. I get to work with new and interesting technology. I get to do research and present my findings to others in the field. I get interviewed for things on like local media when they need someone to talk about video game design. But most of all, I get to be someone who works on games as my job, but not just as like a game designer and a game developer, but a game researcher. And so if there's any one major takeaway I'd have from all this, it's that you never know how things are going to turn out, right? Decisions that I made in the past, things that I was doing because I thought they were interesting, they ended up becoming formative to my overall identity as a game design researcher now. There's a quote by Alfred Lord Tennyson in Ulysses that I like for this, that says, "I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch where through gleams that untraveled world." Basically saying, who you are is a combination of all the things that you have seen and done. And that only opens up a door to all the other things that can happen in the future. So where I am right now is a result of a lot of different things that have happened to me. I got into computer science and cognitive science because of decisions made when I was at the end of high school, talks with my family that led me into areas like computer science, which led me into research. Led me into computer science and artificial intelligence, which led me to research. I was involved in things like being a TA when I was in grad school, where I would help students with the courses that they were taking. And I was a camp counselor. All that stuff led me to go into teaching as a career, which again led me to where I am now. What else? I played a lot of video games, as you can tell, right? Because that was the thing I was kind of cherry picking to help, just show you some of the stuff I've learned over the years. But as a result of that, I knew enough about video games to be able to become like a decent researcher in game design. Plus, I had a lot of other roles. So I was doing things like high school outreach and supervising these undergraduate video game courses. And all that stuff went together into my research, which again led me to where I am now. Even things like my family. I had like a grandfather who kept pushing me to say, work hard, play hard as well, but do both. And so that, when your future opens up to things that are a combination of both your work and your play. So for anyone else, I guess in terms of the future, in terms of what other people can get into, this is meant to just show you kind of the path that I took. And for anyone who is interested in taking this kind of path too, there's a way to do it. Let's say, assuming you go to U of T, you can always take my course, right? In which case we teach you about video game design and then set you up for other kinds of opportunities like research ones later. That's why people go to U of T, to get access to the kind of research opportunities we offer. But also our video game programs involve things like other areas that tie in and supplement game design, things like artificial intelligence, to make the game smarter, not just the players, but also the environment, to make the whole thing feel better. Graphics to make things more photorealistic and create a more immersive environment. Human-computer interaction to help create the better interaction experience between the player and the game. And software engineering to be able to actually take these games and make them in what is always too little time and with too little money and too few people. And in terms of getting into the industry, this is something where anyone in the industry will tell you it's one thing to be able to take courses, and that's always great because then we can say that this person has managed to prove themselves at least in one way or in one aspect of their life. But they want to see other things, mostly passion. They want to see that you've worked on projects and game jams outside of what's required by your programs, and that you've got a whole portfolio of things that, projects you've worked on, games you've seen through from beginning to end, something that shows that you're really interested in the work you do. And getting involved with the community. no one is an island in that they just make games on their own. There are a few cases where they do, but mostly if even people who work on their own have drawn their inspiration from other people or other games. And so it doesn't pay to isolate, right? It's good to be able to find out what people are in the space, and talking to people who work at these companies is often a great way of finding out what opportunities exist in these companies. Anyway, this is what I wanted to try to get through. There's probably more. There's always more, but I'm pretty much out of time at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seal it up at this and say that anyone who has found the things that I've been talking about interesting and want to learn more, you're welcome to reach out. I'm, again, as a member of the community that helps to teach people how video games work and kind of show people what opportunities there are, my job, my role is to help other people along who are interested in similar things. All right. Anyway, so I hope that you enjoyed this chance, this glimpse into what my life is like. And yeah, anyone who's interested in this, I wish you all the best and hope that other people get to do some of the fun things that I do. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to call it a day. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.